So as in many other areas, digital tools are becoming increasingly of interest to the health sector. The WHO Director General has made an announcement that he's starting a Department of Digital Health, and digital transformation is seriously on the agenda of the World Health Organization. We had a Healthcare Unblocked digital health session on Friday with Helen Disney, and there were people there presenting their different digital health projects and ideas and issues. This is something that's squarely on the agenda of the globe, and I'm really delighted to be here with 3 real change makers in the area of digital health, all coming from different aspects, and some of them working with the frontier technologies, which a lot of our conversation's been on today, and some just working on good old school technologies, and they've been at it for a long time. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. What I'll do is just ask each of the panellists to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about what they're doing, and then we'll go into some discussion. And this will be like climate change. We've got 20 minutes. Hopefully we'll excite you. We won't do much more than that, and hopefully we'll generate some curiosity and demand to hear more. So Stefan, let's start with you.
Yeah, very good to be here, and I have to start with sort of an admission that I actually broke a pledge, but the kind of pledge links to some of the issues I will be talking about in terms of data in health and data biases. So I made this pledge that I would never be on a panel that has sort of not some women on the panel beside the moderator. So it's not about the female moderator, it's actually the pledge is about having more than sort of the moderator there. So I broke that pledge. But it actually illustrates part of that problem related to really on one hand, there's transformative power in terms of digital solutions, AI, and data science to transform global health. On the other hand, I think we need to be really aware that there's lots of issues around the data. And we heard already on the ethics panel this morning, and I would like to sort of bring into the 3M. And if you take only one thing away from today, remember this sort of 3M related to data. So we have missing data. There's lots of data missing. Certain parts of the world is basically like data deserts. And so what does it mean then if we develop algorithms and we train them on data sets when certain populations, certain geographies are just totally, having to deal with missing data? So that's the first M, missing data. Second one is basically misuse of data. So when we have actually data, but we are not using that data, and that's the ethics panel sort of brought that up as well. So there's much more we could do actually with the existing data that we have, and really looking forward on sort of what is happening with the data coming. And the third M is the misuse of data. And there's really concern related to what some are calling the data colonization, that we're starting to extract from certain population group data without actually getting back any benefits from this data. So bringing that all together, I think there is a realization that AI is incredibly data hungry. And so we need to challenge the current mindset that is sort of using language like data mining, data as the new oil. These are all sort of commodity-driven old paradigms of scarce resources. It's, if you use up oil, it's gone. If you dig out gold and you use it, it's gone. So we have this sort of mindset of scarcity. Whereas data is basically very easily stored, reproduced. So we need to move from a scarcity mindset into an abundance mindset. And if we really want in the coming years to deliver the full value of AI and digital within health and other domains, we need to start to find ways and have frameworks where data can actually flow. So this idea that we capture data and kind of keep it to us because we hope it's a valuable thing we could sell in the future is just a complete wrong model. We need to have data accessible. We need to have health data as a global public good. And to that extent, our foundation is investing together with the Wellcome Trust and the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, CIF here, both of them here in London. And we just launched 10 days ago, for the next 2 years, a joint commission between The Lancet and the Financial Times that really looks at AI and digital health in the context of UHC 2030 and the issue of health data governance. And it was interesting at the launch, we had that in Berlin during the World Health Summit, and the German Minister of Health, 38-year-old, very young, dynamic minister, Jens Spahn, he kind of brought up that really issue that I strongly believe is we need to move forward, is that the issue around data in the sort of health space is so critical that it probably requires, for the third time in the history of the World Health Organization, some sort of an international legal framework or a regulatory framework like an international health data regulation. And I kind of leave it there for that sort of first bit, but I'm happy then to engage more. So issues around data and data flow is absolutely critical, and we need some better regulation. There's an interesting recent article in the Lancet Digital Health around unicorns and cowboys, which illustrate that within the sort of health data space, there is really wild, wild west. And we better quickly sort of together as a global community figure out some issues which is in the best interest of all of us.
Thanks, Stefan. And look, I know Ed is out there in the wild west with you and has got thoughts about this whole idea about digital public goods and health data as a public good. So, but before we get into that debate, let's just do the introductions and then we'll come back to the whole issue around health data and the future.
Super, thanks very much. My name is Edward Duffus. I'm the Global Head of Innovation at Plan International. And completely agree. I've never met Stefan before, but I think we're going to become new best friends, Stefan. Hope that's okay with you.
That's okay with me.
I'm going to pick up.
Let's start with friends.
Yeah.
Best we can add later.
Okay, I'll go too far. I want to pick up on one of Stefan's points that the data was missing, and point to a specific piece of data which is missing, which I've been working on for the last 6 years or so, and that is civil registration data. So this is the data around births and deaths, and around the world we know very, very little about it. To give you a couple of stats, currently 290 million children around the world don't possess a birth certificate. That's children under 5, and around 2/3 of all deaths, we know nothing about because, in terms of civil registration, because they're not recorded. So if they're not recorded, it means we don't know the cause of death, and you can see the problem starts there. So this area, civil registration, and we link it together with another expression, civil registration and vital statistics, the statistics of life or death, is where I've been working. And technology is playing a really important role. So, Jane's referring to the less frontier technology, just good old, really well-designed technology, which we call OpenCRVS. So we've developed an open source digital platform for civil registration of vital statistics as a global public good. And I think that's really important because civil registration systems around the world, given the data, but it's obvious, but they're broken, completely broken. They run on typically sub-Saharan Africa, for example, colonial legislation and ill-thought-out regulations, poorly served. Governments are terribly poorly served in terms of the technology that's available to them, mostly proprietary software, etc. So we're trying to cut through that, make openly available an open source platform that creates a new standard of civil registration, the recording of births, deaths at source, out into the communities, creating a really new paradigm rather than the passive approaches of civil registration, where typically a registration officer would sit in a district and wait for people to report their births and deaths. Well, guess what? In Zambia, in rural Zambia, a mother is not going to travel 50 kilometers to go and register a child. So we're creating a new paradigm. It's all about active registration in the community using new trusted actors to do this. It's challenging because, of course, existing legal frameworks don't allow for much of what we are proposing, but we have to go through these barriers. Yes, we're on a really exciting journey, currently piloting in Bangladesh We just run a proof of concept in Zambia as well. You can find me outside. I have a stand. I can show you what we've been up to. Maybe I'll start there for.
No, thanks, but I think, a couple of, other than the data as a global public health good, this whole issue of open source when you come to public goods is a really critical issue. New models and outmoded legal frameworks, that seems to cut across all the sectors when it comes to digital. So Frank, we'd love to hear just a bit about what you're doing, and feel free to enter the fray on any of those topics.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot. My name is Frank Ricotta. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Burst IQ, and I'm going to echo a lot of just the data themes, because we think that's very important. It's really kind of fundamental to who we are at Burst IQ. And at Burst IQ, we build immutable health profiles for people, places, and things, and enable interactions between them as kind of a foundational premise of really trying to attack this whole issue of health access and equity. We find just across the globe, there's really a disparity between people really being able to get health services, and we're not talking about just healthcare when I'm sick and I may need a treatment. Health is an everyday, all the time thing. It's more than healthcare. It's having access to food, water, and shelter along the way as well. And so what we're dedicated to at Burst IQ is helping usher in the next generation of health access. There is a tremendous amount of data locked away in current systems. That is absolutely true, and a lot of knowledge buried there. But we're really at the precipice of a new generation of health and health access, one that's centered around who you are, how you're built, how you're living, how your body's functioning. All the omics, genome, proteomics, and even cellular biomarkers. All this next generation of IoT that's becoming very affordable. And of course, we've talked a lot about AI, or augmented intelligence. What's truly been missing is making data accessible and liquid about you and your health profile, not just at a moment in time when maybe you might have something wrong and you need to seek out care, but really your whole health journey map and how that augments how you're living. So what we're really talking about next generation, whether it's environmental or healthcare, it's helping individuals live a better life no matter where they live on the planet. We see definitely a lot of inequities. For instance, in the U.S. it's roughly $10,000 US a year in health expenditure. In the UK, it's half. We have 5% of the population roughly consuming 40% of the healthcare spend. When you deal with clinical trials, 70-80% of them are in Western Europe and North America. That's not really representative of the population. Not to mention, we have this whole notion of we talk about data being valuable, and I agree with an abundance model. But everybody wants to own it and lock it away, and that's just really not the right way to approach this next generation. So we do use some new techniques like blockchain as part of our overall platform, but it's really, again, an enablement technology around unleashing data and really putting control back into the data owner's hands, in true consent model, and extending that consent model all the way out to us as individuals as well.
Frank, that's great, and I want the panel to just pursue that theme a little bit, because we've talked about the health data as a public good. We've talked about that the data is locked away. So currently, if I think about my health data across my life, it's going to be in the hands of multiple hospitals, multiple doctors, multiple insurers, and probably the police, I'm not sure, and I can't get any of it. So I've got Frank's wallet or whatever it is that he's done with Burst IQ. How do we deal with that issue about the data currently being locked up and very few incentives in the system for the people who currently have the data to share it? So I'd love any of you to take that one on, and maybe starting with you, Frank, because you're working on this.
I'll take first crack at that, because we take it from a different perspective. I think if anything that's reliant on pulling data out of the old systems to usher in kind of this new model is probably doomed to failure, because there's an inherent immune system associated with those systems. Too many economic incentives for it not to happen. But conversely, again, we're at this precipice with all this next generation of technology and access and telehealth is really going to force them into the future. And I do believe if you kind of make a demarc point between what was historical and what's going forward, particularly all these things we can gather about ourselves, both healthcare and healthy living will fundamentally change the model. So you have, a handful of governments, a few thousand hospitals, a few million healthcare providers, but billions of people. And I think billions of people effectuating change and forcing different access model, we have the best shot of a really global impact.
Stefan.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Frank. I think we need to differentiate sort of the legacy systems of the years and how much really should we put effort on this, given how little data is actually there compared to how much data within health has been generated just the last 3-4 years. And if you think, so India currently is building on their biometric health stack, basically electronic medical record on their health stack. They will have sort of within the next 2-3 years, probably 100 million people on it. In the next couple of years, 1 billion people basically. So, we need to look at, what are we doing with the future and what is sort of the way we deal with data in the future. But there's good examples, and we are having an evolving partnership with Clalit. Clalit is Israel's largest sort of like the NHS type between Obamacare and NHS. They have 4.5 million people, and for 20 years they've done electronic medical records. And they're actually starting to really use that data. And if you take Israel in OECD, it's sort of in the highest quintile in terms of life expectancy at a third of the cost. And it's basically data-driven health. And they're moving to predictive data-driven preventative health, so really turning things upside down. They've created the first diabetes social impact bond because on their analysis of their data from biomarkers to behavioral data, they can predict 7 to 10 years in advance whether I would develop probably diabetes type 2 and basically enroll me into prevention programs and then have a financing model that basically fosters, the financing of preventative care. So, there's lots happening, but that only happens if we really can let that data flow and make that data accessible. And I think that's really where we collectively need to get a handle on very quickly so that we can really derive that tremendous potential that's in the future. If you just take for a moment, if you look at all the different data sources that will have impact on health, you have this sort of, just what we post on social media, that there's this evidence that you can assess just from the way you type, what you type, when you type, that you can do basically sort of a profiling on your mental health status. Then you have the wearables, you have the clinical data, genomic data, environmental data, and all of that is linked to health and well-being. And if we combine that with sort of sophisticated algorithms and then eventually sort of quantum computing and supercomputing, we have the potential for the first time in human history to have a much deeper understanding of well-being. But that can only happen if you really figure out some of these sort of regulatory ethical questions to make it for everyone, global access.
Ed, that's exciting and empowering. Can you add to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think there needs to be a balance. I mean, I'm glad you referred earlier to, to the frontier technologies and the challenge of the legacy systems. I'm clearly in the legacy systems space, and I think they need fixing as well. And there's a good reason for that. If we think about what a civil registration system does, it's the foundational system of data of life and death in a country. And it provides extremely important data, a universal data set, if you will, if done properly. So if you have universal birth registration of all births in a country, now as you're then providing, if your goal is universal health coverage, it gives you the denominator of that quotient you're really interested in, which is I'm providing services to X number of people out of how many. And you can uniquely identify them as well, so you can actually make universal health coverage, actually achievable. So I think there is a place for legacy systems and fixing them in new ways with public goods. But I just want to make another point because I find the whole discussion this morning fascinating, really, really good. In particular, introducing me to new actors, the impact investors, the people involved in measurement from the keynote earlier today. And I'm thinking, in terms of the data set that I'm talking about, which is a civil registration data set, how completely untapped it is currently. And with help of people in this room, we can generate much, much more value from it, particularly as we take levels up to universal coverage, which is really important. Because if you think about it, a continuous source of all births, deaths, which can then be disaggregated by age, sex, location, there's inherently massive value in that data. Governments have completely not tapped into that in terms of also the business value and building a business case for the collection of that data in the first place, because civil registration is massively underinvested. So I think, for me, that's what's exciting about this space. We're looking at legacy systems being leveraged and used in an open way, the data made accessible, to also finance those systems by governments in the developing world.
That's the best comment of the day for me, because that's exactly why we tried to bring this group of people together, so you would meet and learn from and get ideas from people you wouldn't normally talk to. So thank you so much for that. I can't believe we've run out of time, so I'm just going to ask the people on the panel each for a prediction of where they think this is all going. You've heard some great thoughts and ideas. This is another day-long conference that we're going to have at the very least. So maybe, Stefan, let's start with your prediction.
In December last year, The Economist had a very short article which was entitled Les stats c'est moi, meaning the statistics are me. And if we really reflect on that, specifically in health, all the data that actually is representing me. So if we talk about data ownership, we talk about people's ownership. And so are we moving into modern day data slavery? I don't think that anyone in this room would want that. So to fix it and looking forward, this we can only address through sort of an international framework around health data that provides a global regulatory framework that really protects us, but really not in a way that it will inhibit innovation, but really actually can leverage innovation at global scale.
Thank you. Ed?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a get out. So my prediction is part of our mission statement, because I make it a commitment to honour this. And it's about universal legal identity, because identity is foundation of being protected and being provided for by many actors, including in government. So it's that, and I've got a date in there as well, 2030, that all individuals can be recognised, protected and provided for from birth.
Thank you. And, for the technologists in the room, it's possible. You need to come and help Ed.
Yeah.
So, Frank, what's yours?
I'm going to give you the dark side and the good side of the force. So the dark side is that data will be used to suppress health access, based on your social, what may be perceived as your social economic condition or your value contribution to society. And I hope we don't really see that. But the good side, I'm going to echo what you said. I think it's all around identity and recognizing the inherent dignity of each and every person, and really the emergence of a true sovereign and self-sovereign identity, which includes my health data.
Look, he triggered something, sorry,
Sure.
I know we're over time, but I think it's quite critical. So 2 weeks ago, I met with a group of startups in Berlin, and there was one solution, really exciting, where they basically look through voice, and they can predict through voice, or diagnose through voice certain disease pattern. And they're starting with depression, and there's a big issue globally on mental health. So on one hand, this is tremendous, potential, but there is huge trouble with such systems if they start to be discriminated. What if, employer, when you have a phone interview, is using that kind of diagnostics, and if you have probably seen that you might have a depression, then discriminate against you. That's exactly why we need to have some guidance and some frameworks that actually... Privacy of data is probably not happening anymore. We're living in a new world, but we have to ensure that there is non-discrimination if the data is sort of available.
Thank you so much. Please join me in thanking this panel. It's exciting, it's kind of scary, but we have to harness this stuff because it can really make a tremendous difference to all of us, to our families and to our world. So thank you so much.